Linux Luddites, episode 61, for the 8th of November, 2015. Hello and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we trial the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the old stuff better. I'm Joe, and coming up we're going to have some interviews from OggCamp, and then we'll be looking at Sailfish OS. Now, don't worry, you haven't accidentally tuned into the Joe Rest podcast. It's just me for the intro, but Paddy and Jesse will be joining me shortly. Now, we went to OggCamp recently and recorded a show's worth of content, which I'm going to be editing together here, various interviews, and, as I mentioned, the Sailfish OS discussion on the Jolla phone. Now, the quality isn't going to be kind of up to our usual standard because it was all recorded on the portable Zoom recorder that we've got. And so it's a little bit echoey in places, and there's some church bells at one point. But hopefully it'll give you the atmosphere of the event anyway. It's fairly good quality, but it's just not, 100% studio quality. Before we get started, I've got to mention stickers. You may have seen on Twitter and Google Plus that we've now got some stickers. They're 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, so that's 2 inches by 2 inches to the Americans. And they are pretty good quality. I mean, they're not amazing, but they're all right. We're happy with them, happy enough to give them away. We gave away quite a few at OggCamp, but we've still got some left. So if you are interested in them, it's pretty much the postage that has to be paid for. The cost of the stickers was fairly low. So if you are an existing monthly supporter, then don't worry about it. We'll cover the postage, or if you've ever donated to us. But if you have never supported the show before but would like stickers, then we ask that you kind of give us a little bit of money towards the postage. We're thinking £1 for the UK, and if you're outside of the UK, £2. That should cover it. And if you just basically donate that and then send us an email with your address, your postal address, and we'll get them sent out to you. We're thinking, a couple per person if you want them. I mean, if you've got a lug or something, or, you've got a lot of friends in one area who listen to us, then we can give you more than that. But, we want to try and spread them out so that everyone has a chance to get them. So, yeah, do email us, show@linuxluddites.com, and put stickers in the subject, and then so we'll know. And, yeah, do send your full postal address, and we will get them sent out to you. But if you don't want to pay postage, then you can always get them in person from us at events, like the upcoming meetup, which is happening on the 12th of November at the Mulberry Bush pub, which is on the South Bank near Waterloo Station in London. So if you're around London in a few days, come and meet us. There's going to be Jesse, Popey and Wimpy, hopefully, and of course Scott from Mintcast is coming over. That's kind of the reason we're doing it. It should be good fun. It's just really an excuse to get together and have a drink, really, and just talk rubbish. We had a good time in February, the last one. So do come along to that, and I'll make sure I've got some stickers with me, and you can have a free sticker. So we'll put a link to the blog post that I did about that with all the details, or you can just go to joerest.com, and it's the latest post on there, and it's got all the directions and everything you need to get to the pub. So, yeah, next week we'll be back to normal, but for now, let's get on with the first interview, and that is with the guys from Entroware. Jesse and I had a chance to look at some of their laptops back on show 40, and we were pretty impressed with them, but we had a few little gripes. I'm afraid I was in bed when this interview was recorded because of Ack keeping me out drinking till too late. But Jesse and Paddy spoke to them, so here we go.
So we're at OggCamp with the two gents from Entroware. So just introduce yourselves, and because we've looked at some of your laptops, we'll just cover those.
Yeah, sure. I'm Anthony. I'm co-founder of Entroware.
And I'm Mike. I'm the other co-founder of Entroware.
Excellent. So I see you've got a slightly updated Apollo on your stand.
Yeah.
Can you just describe the changes that are there, and were they as direct feedback from our discussion on them?
They were a big factor, yeah. I mean, we shipped you the Apollo 1000, and you pointed out a few flaws in that, and we have addressed those in our new unit. So we've got a whole new touchpad.
And new speakers and a backlit keyboard.
Yeah.
And USB-C.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't spot that. Nice.
Yeah.
Also Skylake chips instead.
Yeah.
So it's upgraded hardware, sort of the internal processors and things as well as... Okay. And you said the last one was the Apollo 1000, this is the...
2000.
Okay, right, nice. And are there any changes to the Proteus?
No.
Proteus is the same for now. I mean, we've got other new units as well. So, if people still want the kind of powerhouse, then Proteus is still the way to go with that, in that respect.
Okay. And you've also got a Steam box on the table and a Steam controller, which I've had a little play with, which is good fun. Can you just describe that unit?
Yeah, that's very much a prototype at the moment. Still refining certain things, but yeah, it's a proof of concept because once we eventually get the green light from Steam to start selling them, we'll have a much more refined setup, and that's just to kind of showcase where we're going within the next month or so.
So how does it work getting a green light from Steam? I thought anyone could make a Steam box and sell it.
To be able to call them a Steam machine, you need to have you need to be an OEM partner, and we applied for that a few years ago when they first announced it, and they granted us it.
Right.
So when Steam OS becomes stable and released, we'll probably be shipping them at that point.
I take it business as a whole is doing very well, though, because when we spoke about the laptops on the show, very few of us had actually heard of the company before.
Yeah.
And now here you are as a major sponsor of the UK's biggest event.
Yeah, it's going very well. Yeah, I mean, we're hoping that this will be yet another springboard to kind of engage with the wider community, because brand awareness is still kind of an issue. So that's why we're here. Yeah.
As I mentioned, you are a major sponsor here. Are you attending other events as well, and also any non-Linux events to try and spread the word?
We haven't attended any other events as of yet. I mean, this is still like the first rung on the ladder. So we will be looking at other events, but preferably open events.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, good. Lovely to talk to you both again, and
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Cheers.
So as you can hear, they've clearly taken on board some of the feedback they got from us, and I think Linux Voice and other people who had reviewed the units. And meeting those guys, I mean, I spent quite a lot of time with them in various drinking establishments over the weekend, and they seem like really good guys, and they've got a very firm plan, a very firm vision of what's going to happen with their company, and that they know how they have to grow and what they have to do. And I'm very impressed with them. I really wish them the best. We really need a decent company in the UK selling Linux laptops. We need a go-to, and I really hope that they can become that go-to, basically the equivalent of 76, or even potentially bigger than them. Who knows? One day. But that would be great to see. So the next interview then isn't specifically Linux related, but it is of interest, I think, to our audience, or at least I hope so. It was very interesting listening to it for me. This is the one with the church bells, cathedral bells, because we were, OggCamp was in a venue next door to Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral, which is this enormous alien-looking building with really loud bells that were going on. But it's about ham radio, which is, they use a lot of stuff that is related to Linux. So let's hear that now.
So we're joined now by Derek. I've met you downstairs in front of some very interesting looking equipment. Can you just explain what you're here and what's going on?
Yeah, well, my name's Derek. My amateur radio call sign's G7LFC, and we're here from the Southport District Amateur Radio Club, and we're demonstrating amateur radio, the amateur radio hobby, to people who we think would probably be interested in it. It's quite an interesting hobby at the end of the day. It's got lots and lots of facets to it. So as well as communicating with people around the world, there's elements for making in it. There's lots of people build equipment and then transmit on it. One of the gentlemen downstairs is just getting his, he's got a really old piece of kit from 1980s, which he's just salvaged from a sale. And he's just getting it back up and running, and he's going to do some good old-fashioned, what they call RTTY, which is keyboard-to-keyboard communications. So
So one person's on a keyboard, I guess.
Yeah,
the other person. How does the signal come through?
Basically, the device that he's got, similar to the one that I've got. I'm running PSK. He's running RTTY. Basically, we've got a computer hooked up to a radio, and the computer converts the digital signals that we're typing into audio signals, which then get transmitted over the air. And then at the other end of the link, wherever that might be, it could be Europe, it could be South America, we don't know where it'll be at the end of the day. There'll be another radio with a computer attached to it, which will then decode that audio signal back into a digital signal for displaying.
Right. And so that's effectively long range over the air communication.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you have like maybe a sister group that you do your testing with and your discussions with, or do you just send it out and hope that someone pings back a message?
Amateur radio is a worldwide community. There's about 60,000 in this country. There's a couple of million around the world. So the fun is actually transmitting, putting what they call a CQ call out, which is a call saying we want to speak to someone, putting a CQ call out and seeing who comes back. What's the word I'm looking for? You aim for the best and hope for the worst. Is that the right phrase?
Sounds like it's the wrong way around.
It is, yeah. At the end of the day, you sort of expect somebody from Europe to come back to you because they're fairly close to you, and then sometimes you get a really rare call in Japan or something like that come back to you, which is quite a rare contact from over here.
That was going to be my question to you, because I've seen obviously a stonking great big aerial out in the car park hanging off the back of a car. I mean, what kind of range are we talking about?
Well, that's a relatively small antenna. That you want to see some of our big antennas? They're huge. The little vertical one that we've got, I've just spoken to I've just worked somebody in Norway, I've worked somebody in Belarus this morning. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at probably around about 1,600 kilometres off that particular antenna. Depends on conditions, atmospheric conditions. We're also very dependent on space weather and things like that, and that's another area of the hobby really. Me personally, I'm into propagation, I'm into actual radio wave propagation. That's my sort of area of interest. So I look at things that are happening on the sun and work out when whatever's happening on the sun will affect us, and then try and get on the air at the same time to make the best contacts we can. So a lot of our transmissions, certainly our long distance transmissions, are actually dependent on ionospheric conditions way up into space, and that's really affected quite a lot by the sun and the solar cycle.
Is that because, I'm sorry, this is something I know nothing about at all, is that because the actual signal is bouncing off the ionosphere? And then
basically at HF level the signal's going up into the ionosphere, bouncing off it hopefully, but that ionosphere moves dependent on conditions, solar conditions and things like that. If we've got a big solar flare, then that can ionize the ionosphere and cause all sorts of different things to happen. So we can either get certain frequencies won't work, some frequencies will work brilliant, sometimes we'll get multiple hops around the world where the signal will bounce off the ionosphere, come down to Earth and then bounce back up to the ionosphere and get what we call multiple hops. Sometimes the hops will be really small, sometimes they'll be really big. It's just really fascinating. If you're into space weather and things like that, it's a really ideal hobby for people that are into that sort of thing.
Yeah, it sounds very diverse, like you say, with the makerspace sort of side of things and all of the areas you've described. Is there something particular that you and your team are doing today? You know, if you come this weekend thinking, right, we'll try this new thing or get this together, or what have you, and get your kit? Well,
as I say, Paul's resurrected his 1980s RTTY machine. That's a really old sort of fashioned sort of device. I mean, we do the same thing today, but it's a nice piece of kit. That the actual interfaces that we're using, we've all built the interfaces that we're using, so that's in the spirit of maker at the end of the day. We've also got on one of the machines running down there a little plane tracking device.
I've got a little USB dongle that's DVB.
Yeah, that's right.
DVB dongle, and I've done a similar sort of thing, and I can see about 5 miles away, but that's it. But
Oh, right. Well, we're not doing too bad here. We're tracking off a little antenna. The antenna's probably about 8 inches. We've been tracking aircraft probably about 50, 60 miles out into the Irish Sea.
I need to come and have a look at what you've got. Yeah.
It's nothing special. I mean, and at the end of the day, it's £6 and a load of free software to do what 18 months ago you'd have been paying £400 for. In fact, I've got one of the £400 units, and my little £6 dongle actually works better than me £400 commercial set. So,
am I right in thinking you need to be licensed to actually pursue this hobby?
well, yes and no. If you want to receive, then obviously not. And there's lots of people who are happy to receive. Another aspect of amateur radio is the reception of commercial shortwave stations, which are broadcast by organisations like the BBC, Voice of America and things like that. So you'll get people who like to listen to commercial broadcasts, they like to listen to amateur radio operators, and they like to sort of receive the digital signals we're sending and decode them. And then you've got the other side of the hobby, which is the transmission side of it, and for that you do need a licence. But licences are very easy to obtain. We're actually running a course next weekend, 2 successive Saturdays, and the candidates will receive their foundation licence at the end of that if they're successful. And it's relatively easy to obtain.
Okay.
And that will give them sufficient power and frequencies to work the world. So after you get your foundation licence, you'll be sitting down and hopefully with the right antenna and things like that working the world. And it's not an expensive hobby. That's another misconception that people have got. You can get into amateur radio with a £20 handheld and use another sort of aspect of amateur radio, which is things like Echolink and IRLP, which are internet-linked repeaters. So they're radios around the world which are linked over the internet, and people can transmit using a handheld radio to the repeater. Then it goes over the internet, pops out on a radio somewhere else in the world, and somebody else will have a chat with them. So it doesn't have to be a really expensive hobby these days. £20 will get you a half-decent handheld, which you can then, if all you're interested in is talking to people in different countries, and lots of people are, perfect.
Yeah.
Obviously, have been talking predominantly about chatting with folks, but am I right also that there's a packet-based system, so you can actually do data comms?
Yeah, the system that I'm running downstairs, a system called PSK, that's keyboard-to-keyboard communications. Packet radio these days isn't as big as it used to be.
Right.
We do run a variation of packet radio called APRS, which is the automatic position reporting system, where people will be transmitting packets of radio which include their location and things like that, and they're plottable on the internet and things like that, so you can actually track amateur radio operators as they're travelling, like cars loaded up with that sort of equipment. You've got people who are interested in fast scan TV, who actually transmit broadcast quality TV. You've got slow scan TV, which is the transmission of still images and things like that. You've got your keyboard to keyboard. You've got people that who are interested in satellites. I don't know whether you know, but we've got a lot of these things called fun cubes now that are rotating around the Earth. China launched about 6 of them a few weeks ago, and there's several up there already, and they're actually collecting space weather data and all sorts of telemetry and then transmitting them back to Earth. Lots of schools are using these little satellites as an educational tool to learn more about what's going on out in space, but also radio reception and things like that as well. So, there's lots and lots of different facets to the hobby, and I don't know any amateur radio operator that's into all of them. Mm-hmm. We're all into sort of little niches, which is really good.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Thanks for the descriptions and things. Is there anywhere that people could go to find out more, maybe about your particular amateur radio society, or in the UK generally? Yeah,
for sure. We're based in the sort of Southport, West Lancashire area, and you can find out more about amateur radio in the northwest of England if you go to the www.sadarc unfortunate name, SADARC, www.sadarc.org.uk, and that will give you a lot more information about amateur radio in the northwest of England. But nationally, there's also the Radio Society of Great Britain, RSGB, and they can be found at www.rsgb.org.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Jack.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So the third and final interview is with Phil Newborough, otherwise known as Cornominal, who used to develop a distro called Crunchbang, which was Debian with OpenBox. And it was very popular, more popular than he thought it was going to be. And as you'll hear in the interview, he stopped doing that earlier on this year. And we reported on it back then and were very disappointed. I mean, it's not something that I'd been using as a daily driver, but it was kind of a go-to for older machines. And we discussed it in the interview anyway. So let's hear that now. We're here with Phil Newborough, the former developer of Crunchbang, otherwise known as Cornominal. So the question that we've really got for you that I had in the pub the other night is, why did you stop doing Crunchbang?
I mean, personally, I just felt the project had come to a natural conclusion, and that was it. There was no sort of like big bang or anything that happened. It was just, it ran for as long as it did, and I was kind of faced with the move from moving from one Debian branch to the next. So it was on Wheezy. And Jesse was on the horizon, and I had to sort of like weigh up whether it was worth continuing from my own point of view, and decided it wasn't.
I mean, I remember at the time you said that it wasn't really relevant anymore, but given that people have picked it up and carried on with it, clearly it must be relevant to some people.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I think I maybe said that it wasn't relevant to me.
Right.
And being the lead developer, I think, it's a case of, I've always kind of felt with Crunchbang that it was, there's this, they call it dog fooding, where effectively, if you're not working on your own project, then your heart's not really in it and whatnot. And I didn't want to get into that situation where Crunchbang was a side project which I didn't really work on and I wasn't using on a day-to-day basis, which up until that point Crunchbang was the only desktop that I would use. So yeah.
So how many years of your life were invested in the project? When did you actually start?
2000 and it's probably 2007-8 time it started, so what, a good 6-7 years maybe.
Yeah, 'cause it was February this year, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, well, it was February this year that I kind of plucked up the courage just to say, enough's enough, I'm stopping. But I think I've not really. The previous year, development was quite slow, and there wasn't an awful lot going on. So,
So why did it become irrelevant to you then? What was it about Debian and OpenBox that just didn't do it for you anymore?
Well, 5, 6, 7 years ago, OpenBox was on the hardware of the time, OpenBox seemed like a good choice. So that's why I adopted it and used it. But hardware's moved on, and software's moved on. There's some really nice shiny stuff out there, and I wanted to have a play with it.
Fair enough.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's just that there are a lot of older machines still in circulation that people have that they can use very well with OpenBox, whereas with the heavier desktops, it's a painful experience sometimes. But I suppose you're just not bothered then about them. Just let them go off and find something else then.
Well, it's not that I'm not bothered about them. Yeah, I'm bothered about the whole world. No, well, I think I probably mentioned before, but when I first started Crunchbang, there wasn't Ubuntu didn't exist. I don't think LXDE as a option within the Debian task selector wasn't there. All these things have come along, so I think there's plenty of options out there for people.
Yeah.
And so is Crunchbang relevant in that case? Personally, no, I don't think so. I think people would be better off. Personally, I think sticking to vanilla Debian and doing it themselves.
Yeah.
They'd learn a lot more, possibly, maybe.
Yeah, but Crunchbang was a nice, easy out-of-box experience. You just fire it up, install it, and then it's all configured nicely.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and that's kind of. It was easy for the end user.
Yeah.
Not so much for me.
Well, yeah.
Do you think that was attracting the wrong sort of end user, if you like, in doing air quotes?
Well, possibly. I mean,
was it your intent to get people actually interested in Linux and as part of the project, and because it was usable out of the box, you got people at a more superficial level, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, we had Crunchbang had users right across the spectrum, from really novice users that didn't really know what they were doing, to advanced users that were too lazy to do it themselves, and that's brilliant. And I think some of the kind of, some people started using Crunchbang purely because it kind of matched what their idea of a Linux desktop should be, and then they realised, hang on a minute, it's more than just a minimal desktop with a black wallpaper. It's something a bit special, and they learned how to do shell scripting and configuring menus and stuff like that, and I think they kind of enjoyed using Crunchbang. So yeah, and the advanced users just maybe, like I say, maybe didn't have time for Arch or something like that, and just installed it and got on with it.
Yeah. You mentioned it was February when you actually kind of got the courage, if you like, to actually come out and make the announcement. So you'd obviously been thinking about it for a while before then. I mean, those of us on the outside saw the reaction, and there were a lot of people expressing disappointment and what have you. I mean, how was the response to you? Do you think you were treated nicely by the community, and sort of thanks very much for all the hard work? Or
Yeah.
was there some negativity as well?
No, I can't recall there being any negativity. Maybe there was, and I just ignored it. I mean, the thing is, you kind of, after a while, you grow a pretty thick-skinned, don't you? And I didn't really pay much attention to the naysayers in the first place, so I wasn't about to when I was just stopping. That would have been a bit silly.
Yeah.
But
No, I was kind of referring back to, we were having a conversation earlier in the day, and sometimes there's a lack of appreciation for users of products, consumers, if you like, of products, to the actual amount of effort that goes into them. And I just wondered if any thoughts on that.
No, I mean, if anything, I was probably a bit taken aback by the amount of goodwill that was shown when I stopped. Everybody kind of just said, thanks, and it's really nice of you to work on it, and which kind of blew me away a bit, really, because I'd been quite quiet up until that point, and then I don't know, maybe when I sort of like announced it was ending, I was expecting people to, I don't know, get their pitchforks out maybe, but no, they were all super nice, so no complaints from there. Yeah, everybody wished me well, and yeah, it was good. And the I don't know if you're aware, but there's out of it there was a group of members on the forums that were always around and helped out, and they were moderated, and some of them helped out with some of the scripting and whatnot. And they've done a continuation, Bunsen Labs.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing a fantastic job, actually. It's all, they're probably doing a better job than I ever did. They've got a bunch of repositories up on GitHub, and they're really trying to make sure that the whole development process is open, and yeah, they're doing really well. And if you've not tried it yet, it's worth a go. I mean, I've kind of endorsed them as in parts of the Crunchbang site. I think if you try and visit crunchbang.org now, that redirects to Bunsen Labs and stuff. So it's kind of just trying to help them gain a bit of momentum, and I think it's a viable alternative.
Yeah,
definitely.
So in terms of the future then, Is that it for developing distros, or
Yeah.
yeah? So you're not going to do any others?
No.
It's a shame.
Well, I'm sure there's other people out there doing good stuff.
Yeah.
So that's it now. I've kind of thrown the towel in. I'm kind of happy just being an end user, and if I need something, I'll just install it and use it and play around. I've got a few personal projects that I'm working on, but they're not related to Linux really. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But you're still involved with the community. I mean, you're still on the crew of OggCamp, for example.
Yeah. I enjoy coming down and helping out, and been selling raffle tickets. Just sold you guys some raffle tickets.
Yeah, hopefully I'm going to win the laptop.
Oh, I've got no doubt. Yeah, no, you're definitely going to win. Totally. The social part of it, I love. So, Becky and I, we organised Lincoln Lug, and that operates once a month, and we have a fairly good turnout for a Linux lug. Probably between half a dozen and a dozen people turn up every month.
Not bad these days.
No, it's all right. We have a few beers and some food, and everybody gets their laptops out, and we have a bit of a laugh and a joke, and it's good fun.
Yeah.
And then we go off to Newark Lug.
All right.
So that's probably even a bit more. Less people attend Newark Lug. I mean, there was only about 4 of us last month, but again, it's good. And occasionally we go out to Whole Lug, so enjoy it up there.
Great. Oh, well, thanks for taking some time away from the merch booth, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Well, thanks for taking the time to let me tell my story.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, guys.
Shortly after we recorded that with Phil, we went upstairs into a kind of conference room, the 3 of us, Jesse, Paddy and I, and recorded a piece about Sailfish OS, which was made possible by the Jolla phone, which Martin Wimpress lent me. You probably know who Wimpress is. He develops Ubuntu Mate, and he's been on the show quite a lot, and I've become quite good friends with him. And I lent him the Tizen phone that we reviewed before, and he lent me this. So that was quite a good opportunity. It's not entirely open source, Sailfish, but it's got a Linux kernel, so I think it counts. So picture us all sitting around a boardroom table, a very fancy boardroom table, actually, and listen to our review of Sailfish OS. We've looked at quite a few different mobile operating systems on this show. We've looked at Ubuntu phone, Firefox OS, and Tizen. And thanks to Martin Wimpress lending us a Jolla phone, we're now going to talk about Sailfish OS.
Holophone, I think you'll find.
Jolla phone, I think you'll find.
Oh yeah, whatever. So let's start with the hardware of it then. And it's surprisingly nice, isn't it? I mean, I was expecting a cheap phone, but it feels really solid. And you can really feel the Windows phone, the Nokia influence in the design, can't you?
Yeah, you say you're surprised, but it is like, what, £200, £300 phone? It's not like a cheap bit of hardware.
True.
I must admit, I thought it was a bit plasticky, to be honest. I was surprised. I mean, the main thing that struck me about the form factor is how uncomfortable it is to hold in your hand.
Really?
Yeah.
It felt fine to me. I mean, I usually use a case, so it's not really something I'm used to, but I didn't notice it particularly.
I think it's down to a couple of factors. Firstly, it's got very square corners, and the way I hold my phone is with the bottom of it in the palm of my hand, and that just digs into you. And also it's got a removable back, which is part of the features they're pushing, and they sell you different coloured backs, and I'm sure we'll come back to how that works later on. And how the back attaches, there's a bit of a gap between the actual back and the front of the phone, so your fingers actually squish into that. So I just didn't find it a particularly comfortable experience to hold.
Yeah, maybe, I guess Joe and I are used to bigger phones, so we could probably hold them in a different way, because we were laughing at your phone earlier and it's absolutely tiny. But,
yeah, you're holding it wrong.
Yeah, I guess that probably is down to it because of...
But I mean, on the discussion of the back, that is, like you say, one of the selling points, and it's got this thing where you can put different coloured backs on. It not only makes your phone physically look different, but also it changes the theming on the phone. It'll automatically install and get that theme. So it's got some sort of NFC, I guess, in the backs, which tell the phone what's connected.
Yeah, it looks like there was an RFID chip stuck inside the case.
And so the idea is that you can either, buy a pink one for your daughter or buy a black one for yourself, but you could also, companies could sell you one, like there might be a think of a generic brand like Coca-Cola, for example, and all your icons would be slightly the Coca-Cola writing or something. So, it's novel, it's definitely different, and it means that you also can access inside the phone more easily than a lot of handsets these days. So you can change the battery, it's got an SD card slot, and micro SIM. So useful from if you're used to changing batteries and having access to data.
Yeah, I thought the access was good, and where the SIM card slot is, there's a little bit of rubber that goes over the top of it to keep it in place when you are swapping the back out. So, yeah, and from a marketing perspective, it's a good idea because they're flogging these backs for €30 a pop, which is basically for a bit of plastic and an RFID chip. So it's quite a decent business on their part as well. I mean, going back to the hardware, though, things I did like, the buttons were all in the right place on the right-hand side. The earphone jack's in the right place. I couldn't get on with the USB port, though.
Where do you find the right place to be?
The right place is on the right-hand side of the phone.
For the buttons?
For the buttons, yeah. Power at the top and then volume rockers down.
I can't remember where the headphone jack is.
It's on the top.
And that's the right place for that, is it?
That is the right place for that.
Okay.
Again, I think it comes down to use cases, because one of the reasons I've got a small phone and the buttons are in those places is because it lives in my pocket, next to other things in my pocket, and I haven't got space, and I need the jack on the top for listening to music and what have you. But the USB port threw me a bit because it's upside down.
Well, let's have a look at your phone, Jesse. What is this phone?
It's a Moto X 2014.
And that is upside down to me on my OnePlus One, which is the same as Paddy's phone. So there is no standard, is the bottom line. I don't think you could say it's upside down. I think it's...
Well, this clearly USB-C needs to come in.
Yeah, we need a new standard. That's what we need. But one thing that I'm not sure whether it's hardware or software is double tap to wake. Now, presumably you didn't notice that, Jesse, because you're not used to it, because your phone doesn't support it.
No, it has other better features.
Yeah. But I kind of discovered that accidentally, because I'm just so used to doing it with my OnePlus One, and sometimes I do it with other devices and then go, oh, right, no, it doesn't support it, reach around for the button. Whereas this, it just worked immediately, and I was really surprised by that. I suppose I found out how much Martin paid for this and didn't realise that it was quite a pricey phone if you buy it new, because he got it cheap from a pawn shop or something. So you would, I suppose, expect features like that. And I don't know to what extent that is hardware and to what extent it's software, but either way, it's really nice to have.
Yeah, I like that a lot as well. I got double tap to shut my phone off from the launcher I use on Android, but obviously my phone doesn't support it for waking up, and it was really nice rather than having to reach around for the power button.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to move on to the software side of things, and when you first get the phone, you log in, and you don't have to have a Jolla account, but you can log in with a Google account. That's right, isn't it?
You can't get any apps or updates without a Jolla account.
Ah, so I must have made one. Okay, so we made the Jolla account. I tried to sign in with Google, and it failed. But then I got an email from Google saying, you've just signed in from a new Linux machine. So I was quite surprised that it sort of failed on one side, but clearly went through and did actually, after it said it failed, did allow me to access Gmail and things like this on the various email accounts. So it was just a pleasant surprise, I think, to see a phone being activated and Google thinking it's a proper Linux device.
Well, can we go back a step? Before you get into any of that, you have to sit through the tutorial, which you can't skip. Now, I did various factory resets and various tests on it. I must have sat through that tutorial about 10 times. And to be honest, I could not tell you what any of the gestures are. Because it's all gesture-based, isn't it? There's no back button, there's no home button. Everything's like the Ubuntu phone. It's a swipe from the left, a swipe from the right, a swipe up. I mean, you two must have sat through that tutorial. Did it sink in for you?
Sat through 2 different tutorials, because when you first get the phone, it's on version 1 point something or other, and you get an additional tutorial when you go through all the update process and you hit version 2, which is actually version 1.9.2.28 or something, which is really confusing if you're just looking at a phone rather than living with it, because the gestures are different, how the phone behaves is different between the 2 versions. There is a nice tutorial on their website, in fairness, but that is related to the previous version of the software. So that will work for you out of the box, but as soon as you run through the updates to the latest version, you'll find everything's quite different.
Yeah, I guess I must have some things did sink in, of course, and like you say, it's just like the Ubuntu phone where you can swipe an app up and down and left and right within the app, but actually swiping from the edge and from the other edge does different things, so whether to close or go back or what have you. And I have to admit, when I first started using it, irrespective of the tutorial, I really found myself having to think, what was I having to do to move the app forward, go back to the home screen, where were the launch icons?
Yeah.
It really was, I had to think about it, genuinely think as to what I was doing. I found it a bit of a struggle. However, that said, once I realised the nuances and once I realised what, so for example, if there's an application you're in and it's got 2 or 3 screens of sort of subdivisions. So let's say like a music application, and you go to look firstly at your music, then at your artist, and then by album within the artist. And you're sort of 3 levels down, if you will. Little indicators will appear at the top to tell you that you're 3 levels down. So you swipe from the left to go back out, up one, up one, up one, or a big swipe from the right to close the app entirely and go back to the home screen. And at first that was a bit confusing, but then once you've sort of seen it and you know what to look for, I guess it's just a case of living with it for a bit, and I've realised where they were coming from and what I needed to do. So it was a bit more intuitive. The one that really got me though was that on, I think, every sort of phone device, there's the indicator bar at the top that tells you if you're connected to Wi-Fi, what your battery status is, those sorts of things. You can't drag down from the top to access those because that's a different gesture. That's the silent or outdoors and those sorts of themes. The wrong word. It's not themes. Ambiences they're called in Jolla. And so you can't actually access what you expect to be able to access because there's little icons there to show you that your battery is at 50% and you're connected to Wi-Fi, but you can't drag down to look at it, and that's within the settings menu. So that was a bit awkward and complicated. But as I say, once I got used to it, I found it a lot easier than at the start. And
you said settings menu, and it isn't a menu, is it? It's a settings app. You actually have to go into the apps to get to settings, which is really awkward. Yeah,
it is a bit awkward. I mean, but they do have those then as shortcuts. So it's obviously within the application, there's display settings and audio settings and lock settings and, various accounts and things you can have. But the ones that you're going to use all the time, like Bluetooth, like Wi-Fi, there are shortcut apps right on the home screen of the settings sort of panel.
Now, when we were talking about this the other night, you, Paddy, said that you thought it was quite quick compared to your very modest Android phone. Whereas for me, I found it, after I'd done all the updates to version 2.0, or is it version 1.1.9.28, who knows. But once I had it fully up to date, I found it very laggy and slow.
I didn't, but I guess it's expectations, isn't it? It is what I'm used to, and I found it very nippy. It runs Android apps, which I'm sure we'll talk about very shortly, and it runs them well, and it was running my Android apps faster than Android apps run natively on my phone. All
right, but what's the hardware comparison between your phone and this? I mean, we didn't really talk about the specs of it. I mean, it's a dual-core 1.4 Crate 300 with 1 gig of RAM and 16 gigs of storage and a 4.5-inch 540 by 960 screen. I mean, how does the processor and RAM compare to your other phone? Is it similar or is it beefier?
Yeah, I mean, my phone is pretty ropey in fairness. It's only got a 1 gigahertz Cortex-A5 with 0.5 gig of RAM, so it is going to be fairly dire in comparison to anything else modern.
Well, I've got to agree with Paddy. I didn't think it was that slow. I mean, maybe my Android phone isn't as fast, but it's, flagship last year, so I wouldn't expect it to be slow. I thought it was more than acceptable for sort of the hardware and what it was running.
Well, I think for me it was more a case of the earlier version that it came with seemed snappy and fast and no problem. But then having done the updates, it slowed it down. It felt more bloated.
Yeah, I've got to say that's a complaint I've seen on some of the forum posts about it.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about the software and bits and bobs, but the actual interface that you have, and we've mentioned these gesture controls. If I haven't been looking at the phone entirely recently, so if there's any corrections we need to make, do speak up. But from version 2, which I think is fair to be the one we talk about, because everyone will eventually update their phone or should update their phone straight away. So you basically have a lock screen, which you can put a pin on or swipe it up to be out of the way, I believe.
Left or right.
Oh, left or right, it's the first one is up, isn't it? You're right, it's one of those changes that happen. Yep. So you swipe it left or right and you get to the home screen. And the home screen has a sort of basically widgets of what your apps are. So I would consider them widgets. So if you've loaded a music player and a web browser, maybe the settings menu, it shows you like there's a sort of a 4x4 grid, but then becomes a 3x infinite grid that you can scroll up to have all these different widgets. And it sort of just shows a very small icon of what was running. So it looks familiar. And you can actually play or pause music, let's say, we're using that widget without having to open the app entirely. And as you keep on opening more and more apps, more and more of these little widgets appear, and you can scroll through them and then, long press to hold and close it, and what you'd expect with when you're running sort of multiple applications at once.
Yeah, Jolla call them covers, and effectively they're like live tiles if you're familiar with the Windows side of things. And as you say, you can actually perform actions using them. So for instance, if you've got an email application open, you can refresh your email just by clicking on the actual live tile. And you can have an infinite number of them open. By default, your home screen is totally empty, so it's not until you start opening applications something appears there. And that can be a useful way of actually getting to your applications, your commonly used applications, which normally is another swipe up. So for instance, if you've got an email client open most of the time, if you've got a phone client open most of the time, you can reorder them and actually sort of pin them effectively onto your home screen. And even if they get paged out of RAM because the phone's doing something else, it'll still keep the tiles there and just page them back in again. So you can basically create your own default home screen.
Yeah, so once you've selected these, I think live tiles is a fair example, a fair description of how it looks. I found the only problem with them was they had no icon for the application sort of maybe superimposed on them. So you had to look at what the sort of simplified image of that application was, the representation they had of it. And sometimes I found they weren't that intuitive, so I had to really sort of look and try and work out which one's which. So, for example, if you've loaded the terminal application and you can see the last commands you've written in tiny, tiny form, that's fine. But other ones, they just seem to be sort of a grey square, and it was maybe a bit difficult to work out quite what it was that application, what you were doing with it. So I'm not entirely convinced that at the moment it's seamless. I think they need to improve the look of them.
Don't you think that's a reflection of the wider aesthetic? Because it is a very designed operating system. It's a very designed product, full stop, isn't it?
Oh,
and they've
slick,
gone for
yeah.
minimalism. It looks slick, as you say, but it is very minimalistic. And a lot of the visual cues you'd expect to see from applications and such like are missing.
You're talking about visual cues of when you can go back and forward and when there's a menu from the left and the right. And for example, one of the gestures that you have to get used to is dragging down, sort of just pressing them to the screen, drag down, and that's to kind of get menus and stuff and answer the phone when it's ringing. And well, to be fair, when the phone's ringing, there is a cue to do that. But otherwise, sometimes you just try everything else and then you realize, oh, right, the only thing left to do is drag down.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's very, very difficult to see. And I see your point, Paddy, about the design cues they've used. So, yeah, there's a very faint line at the top of the screen, yep, which tells you when you have to, like you say, if a phone call's incoming, it's more obvious. But installing applications, let's say, that's a classic. You're in the App Store and you want to install the application. There's no install button. There's no do this button. There's no action button. And you have to notice this little subtle bar at the top that's appeared. And like I say, Joe, anywhere in the screen, you press and hold down, and that little bar becomes bigger. And then it can have any number of hidden commands that it scrolls through as you scroll on the page of the screen. And it was one of those things that I say, when I started using it, it was really not intuitive as to what the options and where they were. And I was on an install app screen for like 5 minutes trying to work out how the hell I was supposed to get this thing installed. And I suddenly realised, oh yeah, that was that gesture where you pull down, there it is. Subtle, maybe too subtle, but I think you do get used to it. Or you try everything and realise that one of these places has got the options you're looking for.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned minimalism. I mean, the number of apps that are installed by default is very minimal, isn't it? I mean, you can count them on two hands. It's very bare bones. And I quite like that it's not full of bloatware and they're not trying to sign you up to all sorts of services. It's just, the very basic stuff that you'll need, like the browser and phone and contacts and the gallery and settings and stuff. And beyond that, it's up to you to install what you want.
Yeah, that is a good feature, allowing the user to select. If we've covered the home screen, the one item I did quite like is from the home screen, you can pull up, and that's your app drawer. Nothing big to be said about that, really, apart from you can rearrange them as you wish and put them in folders within there, fine. But if from the home screen you swipe from the left, you get a sort of a notification area, which I thought was actually quite good, and is a bit like Google Now. So it had sort of information on how many tweets you'd received since you last looked, and whether you had emails, what the weather was like, and things like this. So it was quite a nice sort of single area that all your, the incoming information to your phone was gathered. So that was something I thought was good on Jolla.
I thought the functionality was good. I think how they achieved the functionality wasn't, because it isn't just a swipe from the left. You can swipe either way. It's basically a carousel from the home screen to what they call events. So that can be seen as a good thing, because you can go around in a circle, but it doesn't make sense to have a carousel when there's only 2 items there. I think from a design perspective, it's just confusing. Make it just one swiping from one edge takes you to the events, swiping from the other side takes you back to the home screen, would be my suggestion.
Can we just talk about the fact that it's a phone for a second? Because we've talked about it pretty much as if it's a tablet. We've talked about the various software and the various things you can do with it. But as an actual phone, I didn't get on with it very well. I put my SIM card in it and sent some text, and I thought the keyboard was quite nice and received text no problem. But then it was unlocked in my pocket and it started ringing. And I tried to answer it, and I had to unlock the phone by putting my PIN code in and then drag down to answer the phone. I mean, is that a bug or a feature? I have no idea. I mean, did you two actually use it as a phone?
I didn't. No, I didn't pull my SIM card out.
I must admit I didn't, but I wouldn't have found the same problem anyway, because I don't use PIN lock screens.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I noticed that in the pub the other night, that you just don't care about security, obviously.
So, as we mentioned earlier, one of the selling points of Jolla is that it can run Android applications. Now, it does warn you on the Jolla store not to install Google Play services, so all of the benefits you get from that are lost, and that makes some applications unusable. So I installed a couple of Android apps. I installed Pocket and WhatsApp, and they worked absolutely fine, as you would expect to be running on an Android phone. There were other applications that had more problems. So I installed LastPass, and on Android, LastPass will pop up when you go onto another application which requires login details and suggest that it will autofill for you. Whereas this can't, because it's not running another Android application. It isn't working in the back end the same way that it expects to see. Also, there are like 4 stores. There's like a Jolla store and an Aptoid store and a Yantex store and all sorts of things, some of which have Android applications in them, some of which don't. And actually, to get the LastPass application, it wasn't any of those stores that come already on the phone. I had to install another store, and this one was looking... you just don't get a good feeling about a particular website or something. Yeah. I was going around it and I was thinking, I'm just installing this random store, hoping that the LastPass install is the one that is the one you... And I just wasn't really very comfortable with it. And with the Play Store, I feel you've got a certified application going onto your phone, and whether or not the developer of that application can be trusted is another conversation. But if someone is putting up their own store and installing, allowing you to install your own things, I don't think you have the same quality controls as you'd have from something like, the iPhone store or the Play Store or what have you.
Well, I just sideloaded all my APKs. I just extracted them from my OnePlus One and copied them over and installed them. And I'd say most things that don't use Google Play services are going to work reasonably well. I mean, AntennaPod, the podcatcher that I use, seems to work fine.
Yeah, it's easy to say, but a lot of applications do use things that are on Google Play services. I mean, let's obviously write off all Google apps.
Yeah.
You then have other applications, and laugh if you want, but I did try installing Tinder on the phone. And it would have worked, but it requires access to your wallet. It requires access to in-app purchases. And so it failed because it requires Google Play services to allow you to buy stuff through that. If it used a different method of payment, like WhatsApp I think has its own payment method, it installs fine because you're not relying on Google Play services. But because they had that one dependency, it wasn't working.
I must admit, I went down the same route as Joe and tried a variety of things from my existing phone. I just got the APKs and copied them across. And I think it's worth pointing out that unlike a lot of Android devices today, this works really nicely. When you plug it into your PC, it basically just appears as a bunch of directories that you can dump stuff into.
What?
What PC did you put it in?
I put it into Ubuntu 14.04 and quite happily popped up. Mass storage device.
I put it into Ubuntu 14.04 and it just crashed Thunar and just wouldn't work.
Did you have an SD card in?
No.
Because even on the website it says connecting it through Windows is fine, connecting it through Mac is good. You will struggle with Linux. And I was shocked to see it literally on the website, black and white. Don't use it on Linux. And I tried. I had OpenSUSE still on my machine from a review we did and looked on various forums and things. And it was saying about installing this and faffing around with that. And I have to admit, I spent half an hour on it and thought, this is not easy playing.
And it just worked first time for me. I mean, that's one of the joys of several of us looking at the same thing, because otherwise I'd have just assumed it worked for everybody. But
yeah, well, I mean, I had no joy at all. It just wouldn't recognise it. Then I formatted an SD card, FAT32, put it in there, and then it seemed to work perfectly. But then I had problems with Thunar crashing, so I had very hit and miss experience with it. But speaking of the SD card, once it's in there, it seems a bit pointless, because apart from copying media onto it and being able to play that back, there's not a lot else you can do with the SD card. None of the apps that were on the phone seem to be able to interact with it. Like the camera, for example, I couldn't see an option to save to the SD card. And I don't think it was doing that by default. So what's the point of having an SD card?
yeah, it's got a built-in backup restore process, which will use the SD card. But other than that, I agree with you. I couldn't see many things that did.
So what, you couldn't put music on the SD card and play it with the music player?
No, you can do that. But you can't, for example, tell the camera to record videos and take photos and put those on the SD card. They just go into the internal storage, and then you'd have to plug it into a computer and copy them over every day or whatever.
Yeah, that doesn't sound ideal.
Well, just tracking it back to the Android app support, I think we all found, apart from where gaps were required, it was actually really good. I mean, the only thing I particularly noticed that didn't work was like audio controls on the lock screen. For native Jolla apps, obviously they're there. For Android apps, they didn't appear.
Yeah, and I mean, getting into the media playback, I used MX Player because the native app just wouldn't play back any videos, pretty much, any codecs. So installing MX Player, which is what I use on Android, it worked well until you tried to change the volume within the player, because you can just slide up and down on the right-hand side, I think it is, of the video that you're watching, and it kind of adjusts the volume accordingly. And that just seemed to crash it, basically. So it's not fully integrated, is it? Although the Android apps will run, they're not going to run. I mean, it's not a surprise, is it, that they're not going to run as well as on an Android device. But, I mean, looking at Tizen, that had Android support. And I don't know, I mean, that phone was more modestly spec'd, I suppose you would say. And the Android apps that I tried were very kind of juttery and whatever, but we kind of said at the time that throw more hardware at it and it should be okay. I mean, remembering back to that, what do you think, which does it better, Tizen or Sailfish, in terms of Android apps?
My take would be Sailfish, simply because everything worked more smoothly. As you say, that's partly hardware, but also the fact that it's open. Well, it isn't open, I'm sure we're going to talk about that, but it does expose a whole Android file system to you nicely when you actually have the Android services running. So you can forage around. It creates all the usual directories and you can put stuff in the usual place. And obviously the apps need that. So if you're looking at something like Antenna Pod, it might be looking in the podcast directory and expect that to exist, and that's created automatically for you. So certainly for side-loading apps, the way that I went about things, and I think you did as well, Joe, I would say that the Sailfish phone is hands down the winner.
Agreed. I don't remember having a particularly good time with Android apps on Tizen, whereas on this, I did hit a couple of things, and it's annoying not being able to have native Google Maps, for example, and things like this, but You get over that, and it is by far and away the best Android experience not on Android. And the discussion about the number of apps on, for example, the Ubuntu phone, we talked to Papy earlier this weekend, and it's topped out at about 2,000, still increasing, but that's not a lot. If you're able to open up your phone to however many Jolla apps plus a mostly working set of Android apps, you really do have a significant head start on everyone else.
But, I mean, does that not mean that developers won't bother developing for Sailfish OS because they know their Android app will probably work on it anyway? So there's much less incentive. Whereas with Ubuntu, if you're going to be working on an Ubuntu phone, you've got to either have a web app or write it specifically for it. So I don't know. I mean, I can see why they've done it to broaden the appeal of it, but I think long term it might not work out that well for them.
You mentioned the Ubuntu phone there, and that's an obvious point of comparison. And I did actually want to move things onto licensing a little bit, because Sailfish is often sold as being an open source development platform and operating system. And it isn't. Parts of it are, but a whole heap of stuff, including all the UI, is proprietary at the moment. Now, they've promised to open source it at some future date. We've heard those sort of promises before from other companies, and they've not come to fruition.
I can't see it being open sourced. I'd like to see it, but I'm pessimistic about it. And that, we like to knock the Ubuntu phone. And I mean, kind of drawing this towards a conclusion, it does feel far ahead of Ubuntu, but at the same time, Ubuntu is fully open source. So it does have that going for it. If Sailfish were to be fully open source, then this would be the horse to back. I mean, previously I'd said Tizen, but there's no way Tizen's going to be open source. I mean, it might have the Linux kernel, but, you know, I just can't see Samsung actually fully open sourcing it. But I don't know, most people don't care about that stuff today. They just want a phone that works. And I suppose most people are just going to have an iPhone or an Android phone anyway. But if you are going to try and disrupt that duopoly or whatever you want to call it, then you just have to be good. It doesn't matter whether you're free, because people don't care about that.
So what do you think it is about this phone that would attract people to buy it in the first place then?
Well, I think the interface is attractive. I think it's a good-looking bit of software,
yep.
and it's elegant, and there are, you know, genuinely moments where you think, oh, someone's really thought about the design there, and it's sparkly, for want of a better word. It's got sort of a pizzazz about it. So, you know, like you said, it's very design-driven. It's very elegant. I think the hardware is quite nice. I'm surprised there's only one phone at the moment, but maybe if they get sort of a high end and a low end and, you know, make a market there. And the fact that it has this unique ability to run Android apps means that it's already going to be ahead of the competition. It already is ahead of the competition because it's got a whole load of apps you can run on it. So from my point of view, of the ones we've looked at, and I know that it's maybe unfair to compare it to Tizen and Firefox OS, because at the time we reviewed those, they were aiming at low-end hardware, cheap cost, and out to developing markets. Now, I know that Firefox OS has since changed their sort of marketing strategy, but when we looked at them, that was how it was. And so the hardware was very, very cheap. And you have to have a very nimble, light operating system without flashy changes and swipes and things going on. So it is in a different sort of league, but I think that that's the same league that Android is in and that iOS is in. And so it's competing with the big boys, and it's doing it on expensive, good quality hardware.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression it is very nice all around, but why would you buy it? I guess probably just as a statement.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think it's less of a statement than having an Ubuntu phone in your pocket, but it certainly is a statement.
Okay, it's making a practical statement.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking, really, is people who want a Linux-based phone that can do proper Linuxy things. I mean, if you enable developer options, you can have a full-blown terminal, which has a different keyboard, and that's a bit clunky. I'm not quite sure. I suppose it needs like the tab button and stuff. But you can also have an SSH server. You can SSH into this phone and do proper Linuxy things on it in the same way that you can with the Ubuntu phone. But unlike the Ubuntu phone, there are actually decent Android apps available for it. And, you know, it has a much larger pool of apps that you can run on it. So I think that it's kind of a best of both worlds, maybe. It's much more Linuxy than Android, but it's not so Linuxy like Ubuntu phone that there's nothing you can actually do with it beyond the Linuxy stuff.
I think that's a fair summary. I would agree with that, yeah. I mean, the only point to note if we're discussing the Ubuntu phone and what we've seen today with the convergence and moving to Unity 8, when applications are able to run on your phone and the same code can run on your desktop when you plug it in and it, you know, transforms, if for want of a better word, into a fully fledged app, they are moving the goalpost as to what phones can do and what you're using them for. And in the next 2-3 years, that may well be where a lot of other phones go. Look at Windows and their recent their recent showpiece. So today, I would say the Sailfish OS Jolla phone is ahead of Ubuntu. Whether in 2 years' time it's still relevant because it is only a phone platform may well be a discussion for then.
Well, it might not even be 2 years away. I mean, looking at what we're seeing here at OggCamp with, you know, it's nearly there with Unity 8. You can see it in action now. I mean, it's not production ready, but it could be as little as a year before you've got actual devices that can do it. I mean, Popey keeps hinting at this BQ converged device that is potentially much further along the line, but they just can't show us it yet or don't want to show us it yet. And I agree with you. Right now, Sailfish OS feels ahead of it, but the second you can buy an Ubuntu phone that you can dock into a screen and with a keyboard and mouse and actually use as a proper computer, that will suddenly make it much more attractive and almost make up for the lack of native apps. And I think will attract developers to it to develop native apps and will really push the platform forward. So I'm hoping that that happens, and I'm hoping that it works well, because Ubuntu is fully open source and I would like it to work. I mean, they haven't done it necessarily how I would have. They've done it with Mir instead of Wayland and all of that stuff. But if that happens, then it is good news for open source mobile platforms and Linux-based mobile platforms, definitely. So all in all then, I would say it's definitely worth having a look if you can get your hands on one of these things. They're not that easy to get. I don't think it's worth several £100, but if you can find one in a second-hand shop or something, or on Gumtree or whatever, then I'd say, yeah, it's worth it. And I think you can install Sailfish on the Nexus 4. I think I did it myself. I'm not sure if it's the latest version, but it's definitely worth a look, and it's definitely one to watch. But I mean, I'm not going to go out and buy a phone anytime soon with Sailfish on it. So as you can hear, we kind of liked it, but you know, it's something that's got potential, which seems to be the case with all these alternative Linux-based mobile operating systems. None of them are quite there yet. They've all got potential in different ways. So we'll see about that. And the Ubuntu convergence thing was probably the highlight of OggCamp for me. Seeing Popey there demonstrating a Nexus 4 that was docked into a screen and keyboard and mouse and was working as a proper computer. Again, it's not production ready, but it's a big step. It's a really big step, I think, and we will definitely be following that story with great interest, and we'll be covering it, no doubt, going forward. But the whole event was brilliant. I mean, as I always say, the biggest and most important bit of OggCamp is the hallway track, or the beer track, the pub track, because I didn't actually see any talks, I don't think, on the Sunday, because I went there late because I was so hungover, and then we were kind of getting some interviews and recording that piece about Sailfish. But that didn't really matter to me. I mean, yeah, I did miss some great stuff. I missed the Linux Voice live show, which I was really disappointed. I'm going to have to just listen to that one. But the whole point of it is it's a community event where you get together and meet up with people who you haven't seen for ages, probably a year in most cases since the last OggCamp. And it's also people who you've only met online or you only speak to online. So it's brilliant. And also the talks that I did see were really great as well. I mean, I spent most of Saturday looking at the talks. Oh, yeah, and I did the panel as well, which was quite a learning experience. It turns out that it's very, very difficult to moderate a panel, especially if you've got opinions that you want to spout yourself. Apparently, you're not supposed to do that, which I learnt on the Saturday night. And it turns out that I wasn't very good at that. But hey, you live and you learn. And hopefully, if I get to do it next time, it'll be better. But it was still a good discussion anyway. The recording of it didn't go brilliantly for various reasons. I'm going to see if I can salvage it. And I don't know what I'm going to do with it. If I can salvage the recording, because basically all of the crowd interaction didn't really get recorded. It kind of did, but really poor quality, and that was a big factor in it. There was a lot of back and forth, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I know we go on about OggCamp a lot, and this hopefully will be the end of it if you're not interested. But if you are interested, then definitely go next time. There's talk of it happening again next year, and there's talk of Jesse and I being involved in organising that, hopefully. And there's even the remote possibility that it might be in London, but no one knows. It could be anywhere. I'd love to see it happen in London so I can get the tube home, but we'll have to see on that one. But with that, we come to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com. You can find us on Twitter or the Google Plus or Facebook communities, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again next week when things will be back to normal for more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy. See you later.